Our eyes are liars done not by choice, but by design. They present us with a clear, focused picture of the world, a small circle of reality where we place our trust. But what about the edges? That blurry, indistinct periphery where movement is just a suggestion and shapes are undefined. We are taught to dismiss what we see in the corner of our eye, a trick of the light, a floater. Our brain playing games. It's a survival mechanism, filtering out the noise to focus on the immediate. But what if that filter is wrong? What if the real danger isn't what's in front of you, but what's standing just at the edge of your perception, patiently waiting for you to turn your head? What if that fleeting, dark shape you just saw darting out of the room wasn't a trick of the light at all? These are not stories about what is seen, but about what is almost seen. They are tales of shadow people, of figures that exist only in the corner of your eye, of entities that understand the blind spots of our own biology. Today, we delve into 6 true, terrifying accounts from people who learned that the most horrifying things in this world are the ones that are hiding in plain sight. But before we dare to look at what's lurking at the edges, make sure you are subscribed to Whispered Fear and have activated the bell. You wouldn't want to be the only one not watching when it finally decides to step into the light. Look away. Our first story is about the ghosts of our perception. It comes from Kevin, a 42-year-old accountant, for whom the world was a grid of numbers and verifiable facts. He spent 10 hours a day staring at spreadsheets, his reality confined to the neat, orderly cells of an Excel document. His world was logical, quantifiable. He didn't believe in ghosts, but he learned that what you believe doesn't matter to the things that watch you from the corners of your own vision. Kevin worked on the 14th floor of a modern, soulless office building downtown. The office was an open-plan landscape of gray cubicles, gray carpets, and glass-walled conference rooms. During the day, it was a hive of quiet activity. But Kevin was a chronic late worker. He often stayed until 9 or 10 p.m., long after the hum of human activity had faded, leaving only the low drone of the servers and the cold, fluorescent lights. In these quiet hours, the vast, empty office transformed. It became a maze of shadows, a silent waiting space. The first time he saw it, he was deep in a complex quarterly report. The numbers swam before his eyes. He blinked, rubbing the bridge of his nose, and in that moment, in the far right edge of his peripheral vision, he registered movement, a flicker of darkness, a quick vertical shape darting behind a concrete support pillar near the distant HR department. He turned his head sharply. Nothing. Just the pillar, the ficus tree next to it, and the empty corridor beyond. He immediately dismissed it. He diagnosed himself. Eye floaters. Too much screen time. It was a logical explanation. As an accountant, he was used to staring at a screen for unbroken hours. Eye strain, fatigue, these were familiar companions. He put a few drops in his eyes, rolled his neck, and went back to work, the incident forgotten. A week later, it happened again. He was proofreading a report, his focus absolute, and there it was again, in the same spot, at the edge of his right eye's vision. This time, it wasn't just a flicker. It was a shape. A tall, impossibly thin, man-shaped shadow. It stood perfectly still by the water cooler. It was darker than the natural shadows of the room, a void in the dim office lighting. He felt a cold prickle of unease. He didn't turn his head this time. He kept his eyes locked on his monitor, but shifted his awareness to the periphery. The shape remained, unmoving. He counted to 10, then turned his head with a sudden jerking. Motion. Gone. There was nothing there but the water cooler gurgling softly to itself. The ficus tree stood a few feet away, its leaves still. This time, the logical explanation felt less satisfying. He got up and walked over to the water. cooler. He ran his hand along the wall, touched the plant. Everything was normal, solid. He felt foolish. He reasoned, "It's the tree. From the corner of my eye, the shadow of the ficus tree looks like a person. It was a stretch, but it was a rational one, and he clung to it." But the sightings became more frequent. The tall, thin shadow man started appearing in different locations, always at the very edge of his vision, sometimes to the left, standing motionless in the doorway of the empty marketing department. Sometimes far down the main corridor. A stick-like figure in the distance. It never moved when he tried to observe it peripherally. It was only ever there in that first, fleeting, subconscious glimpse. The moment his conscious mind registered it and he tried to focus, it would vanish. It was a ghost that could only exist when it wasn't being properly looked at. Kevin's work began to suffer. His precision, his greatest pride, was faltering. He found himself constantly glancing around, his focus shattered, his eyes darting towards the shadowy corners of the vast office. He started to wonder if something was genuinely wrong with him. A neurological issue? A tumor pressing on his optic nerve? The fear of a medical explanation was, for a time, more terrifying than the thought of a supernatural one. He decided to conduct an experiment, a logical test to debunk his own senses. He propped up his smartphone on a stack of books, its camera aimed at the empty corridor to his left where the figure often appeared. He went back to his work, trying to ignore the constant prickling sensation of being watched. An hour later, he saw it, a fleeting glimpse of the tall man, standing silently in the doorway. He didn't turn his head. He waited a full minute, his heart pounding, then stopped. The recording. He played the video back, his eyes glued to the small screen. He scrubbed through it frame by frame. Nothing. The corridor remained perfectly empty for the entire duration of the recording. A new, deeper dread washed over him. The logical part of his brain was relieved. There was no intruder, but the primal part was terrified. If it wasn't on the camera, then the problem wasn't in the office. It was inside his head. That night, he left work at 5 p.m. for the first time in years. But the feeling of being watched followed him home. He would catch glimpses of a tall shadow in the reflection of his apartment window, or a thin figure darting across the street. Far behind him. It was no longer confined to the office. It had followed him. It was attached to him. The fear of going mad was now all-consuming. The climax came 2 weeks later. Kevin had been forced to return to his late-night schedule to meet a critical deadline. The office was emptier than ever. A powerful thunderstorm raging outside, the rain lashing against the 14th floor windows. Flashes of lightning periodically bleached the office in stark white light, revealing the forest of empty cubicles before plunging it back into dim fluorescent gloom. He decided to block out the world. He put on his noise-canceling headphones, blasting classical music, and stared only at the numbers on his screen. He would not look away. He would not glance at the periphery. He would finish his work and leave. For an hour, it worked. He was in the zone, his world reduced to the glowing grid of the spreadsheet. Then he saw it. Even without looking, he knew it was there. In the far left of his vision, a flicker of absolute darkness. It was closer this time. Not in a distant doorway, but standing by the next row of cubicles, only about 20 feet away. He didn't turn. He refused to give it the satisfaction. He thought to himself, "You're not real. You're a symptom of stress and eye strain." He felt a sudden intense cold envelop him, a pocket of Arctic air in the climate-controlled office. The music in his headphones dissolved into a roar of white static. He winced. Pulling the headphones off, the office was silent, save for the drumming of the rain against the glass. He stared at his computer monitor, at the spreadsheet. Then, the monitor went black. The sudden darkness was a shock. He sat there in the dim glow of the emergency lights, his own pale, terrified face reflected in the dark screen. And he wasn't alone. In the reflection, he could see the office behind him. He could see the back of his own chair, and standing directly behind his chair, its impossibly long, thin form looming over him, was the tall man. It wasn't a shadow anymore, it was a solid three-dimensional shape of pure blackness, a hole in the fabric of the room. He had finally seen it directly, not with his own eyes, but through the dark mirror of his powered-down computer screen. He was frozen, every muscle locked in a rictus of pure terror. He watched in the reflection as the entity, the tall man, slowly raised one of its long, thin, shadowy arms. It reached forward, its fingers like black icicles, and slowly, deliberately, placed its hand on the shoulder of his reflection. At that exact moment, Kevin felt an icy, heavy, crushing pressure on his real shoulder. It was real. It was touching him. He couldn't scream. He couldn't move. He could only stare at the horrifying tableau in the reflection. The tall man leaned forward, its featureless head moving next to his own reflected ear. The screen flickered, the power coming back on for a split second. And the last thing Kevin saw before the spreadsheet reappeared was the reflection of the tall man's head, turning to look directly at him from inside the monitor, its shadowy face splitting open into a wide, silent grin.
Don't look up.
Our next account comes from a woman named Maria, a freelance writer who learned that some horrors don't hide in closets or under the bed. They hide in plain sight, in the empty spaces we never think to look at. They hide on the ceiling. Maria lived in a small, cozy bungalow, a place she had curated to be her perfect sanctuary for creativity and quiet. Her evenings were a comfortable ritual. After dinner, she would settle onto her plush sofa in the living room, a cup of tea, on the coaster beside her, and lose herself in a movie or a book. The living room was her favorite space, with its warm lighting, soft rug, and large window that looked out onto her quiet, tree-lined street. The first time she noticed it, she was watching an old black and white film. It was late, past midnight. The house was silent. As she watched the flickering images on the screen, a flicker of movement in her upper peripheral vision caught her attention. She didn't look up. It was probably just a moth. Attracted to the light of the lamp in the corner, she kept her eyes on the movie. A few minutes later, it happened again. A definite dark flutter, just at the edge of her sightline, near the corner where the wall met the pristine white ceiling. This time, it seemed larger. She paused the movie. The sudden silence in the room felt heavy. She slowly, reluctantly lifted her gaze. There was nothing there. Just the clean, white expanse of the ceiling. She scanned the corners, the light fixture. No moth, no spider, no water stain. She frowned, a flicker of annoyance mixing with a faint, irrational unease. She pressed play. On the movie, the familiar dialogue a comforting sound, and pushed the incident from her mind. But over the next week, the fleeting movements became a regular occurrence. Every evening, as she sat on the sofa, she would see it, a dark shape, a smudge of shadow in the corner of her eye, always on the ceiling. It was like having a persistent floater in her eye, except it wasn't in her eye. It was in the room. She tried to rationalize it. It was a trick of the light from the TV, a shadow cast by passing cars, a flaw in her own aging vision. She tried to ignore it, to force her focus entirely on the screen in front of her. But it was impossible. The human eye is designed to detect movement in the periphery. It's a survival instinct, and her instincts were screaming that something was up there. One night, she decided to confront it. She put on a movie she didn't care about, settled onto the sofa, but instead of watching the screen, she watched the ceiling. She didn't look directly at the corner where it usually appeared. Instead, she focused on the center of the ceiling and let her peripheral vision do the work. For almost an hour, nothing happened. She was starting to feel foolish, her neck aching from staring upwards. She was about to give up when she saw a dot. It didn't just flicker this time, it coalesced. In the far corner of the ceiling, a patch of shadow began to darken and deepen, separating itself from the natural shadows of the room. It was about the size of a dinner plate, an amorphous, inky blotch on the white plaster. It didn't move. It just hung there. Her breath caught in her throat. It was real. She was looking at it, albeit indirectly. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She knew with a primal certainty that if she turned her head to look at it directly, it would be gone. The game had rules. So she sat there, pretending to watch the movie, her eyes fixed forward, while she tracked the impossible shadow on the ceiling with her peripheral vision. For minutes, it remained motionless. Then, it began to move. It didn't dart or fly. It crawled. It moved with a slow, silent, creeping motion, like thick oil spreading across a surface. It had no defined shape, no limbs, but it moved with a clear sense of purpose. It began to crawl along the edge of the ceiling, following the line where the ceiling met the wall, always staying at the very edge of her vision. A cold, paralyzing fear washed over her. This wasn't a trick of the light. This was a presence, an entity made of pure shadow, and it was exploring her living room from above. She wanted to run, to scream, but she was trapped in a horrifying experiment of her own making. She knew that looking away, or looking directly at it, would break the spell. So she remained, a statue on her own sofa, while the crawling shadow made its slow, silent circuit around the perimeter of her ceiling. It took almost 20 minutes. When it reached the corner where it had started, it stopped, pulsed once, a slow, deliberate darkening and lightening, and then slowly it faded, melting back into the natural shadows of the room until it was gone. Maria didn't move for an hour after it vanished. The movie had ended, the screen dark, her tea gone cold. The silence in the room was no longer comforting. It was menacing. The empty, white ceiling above her was no longer a blank surface. It was a hunting ground. The next night, she couldn't bring herself to sit in the living room. She stayed in her kitchen, the bright, harsh lights a welcome shield. But the night after, she knew she couldn't live in fear in her own home. She had to know what it was. She repeated the experiment, but this time, she placed her smartphone on the coffee table, propped up at an angle, its camera recording the ceiling. She sat on the sofa, her gaze fixed forward, and waited. The shadow appeared, just as it had before. It coalesced in the corner, a patch of living darkness, and it began its slow, silent crawl. Maria sat perfectly still, her body rigid with terror. While the phone recorded. The shadow completed its circuit, faded, and was gone. With a trembling hand, she reached for the phone and stopped the recording. She played it back, her eyes glued to the screen. The video showed her ceiling, the light fixture, the corners of her living room, but it was just a video of a ceiling. There was no shadow. Nothing. It was invisible to the camera. The terror intensified. This thing, whatever it was, wasn't just a physical phenomenon. It existed in a space between light and perception, visible only to the corner of a living eye. The fact that she was the only one who could see it made her feel utterly, terrifyingly alone. The next night, it changed the rules. She was sitting on the sofa, but this time, she refused to look up. She kept her eyes on her book, her focus absolute, but she could feel it, a cold spot in the room, a pressure in the air. She knew it was there. And then, she saw it. Not on the ceiling. It had come down. In the reflection of the dark television screen in front of her, she could see the living room behind her. And in the reflection, the dark amorphous shadow was no longer on the ceiling. It was on the floor, behind the sofa, and it was crawling towards her. She watched, paralyzed, in the reflection as the patch of darkness crept across the rug. Silent and predatory, it reached the edge of the sofa where she was sitting, and then it began to crawl up the side of the sofa. A scream tore from her throat. She leaped off the couch, spinning around. There was nothing there. The rug was empty. The sofa was empty. But when she looked back at the dark television screen, the reflection showed the shadow now slithering over the cushions where she had just been sitting. It wasn't just a shadow anymore, It was a presence that could interact with the world. It wasn't just a shadow anymore, It was a presence that could interact with the world. A creature that had learned to use reflections to get closer. She fled the house and stayed at a hotel that night. She returned the next day, armed with a new plan. She bought heavy, thick blankets and covered every reflective surface in the house. The TV, the windows, the glass on picture frames. She would blind it. She would take away its mirrors. That night, she sat in her shrouded living room, the air thick and claustrophobic. She felt a strange sense of victory. She had taken back control. The house was silent. There were no fleeting movements, no cold spots. For hours, she sat, reading, a fragile sense of peace returning. Then she felt it, a cold draft on the back of her neck. She froze. The windows were closed. The doors were locked. She slowly, so slowly, lifted her head, and she looked up. The crawling shadow was back. It was directly above her on the ceiling. But it was different now. It was no longer an amorphous patch. It had begun to take a shape. It was elongating, forming thin, spider-like limbs of pure darkness. It was evolving. And it wasn't crawling anymore. It was lowering itself from the ceiling. A single, thin tendril of absolute blackness descending towards her, like a spider dropping from its web. She didn't scream this time. There was no air in her lungs. She could only watch as the tendril of shadow stretched down, until it was just inches from the top of her head. It paused, seeming to sense her terror. Then, from the tip of the shadow tendril, a single cold black drop of liquid darkness fell, landing silently in her hair.
She's not alone.
Our next story comes from a father named Tom, a man who believed the greatest monsters were the ones that existed in the real world. He was a protector, a guardian. His 6-year-old daughter, Lily, was the center of his universe. He had installed the best security system, checked the locks twice every night, and made sure her bedroom window was always secure. He was prepared for any tangible threat. He was not prepared for a threat that lived only in the corner of his eye. Their house was a typical suburban 2-story, a place of scraped knees, bedtime stories, and the comfortable chaos of family life. Every night, Tom had a ritual. After Lily was asleep, he would sit in his study across the hall, leaving his door and her door slightly ajar, so he could hear her if she called out. He would work on his laptop, the quiet hum of the house, a comforting blanket around him. The first time he saw it, he was deep in thought, staring blankly at the wall. In the sliver of hallway visible through his open door. At the very edge of his vision, he saw a flicker of movement, something small and dark, darting out of Lily's room and disappearing down the hall. He immediately stood up, his protective instincts kicking in. He called out, "Lily?" He walked into the hallway. The hall was empty. He walked to her room and peeked inside. Lily was fast asleep in her bed, her breathing soft and even, her favorite stuffed bear clutched in her arms. He checked the window. Locked. Checked the rest of the upstairs. Nothing. He returned to his study, shaking his head. It must have been a shadow, a trick of the light from a passing car. But it kept happening, night after night, always when he was distracted, always just a fleeting glimpse. A small, dark shape, about the size of a child, darting out of Lily's room with an unnatural speed that never made a sound, that it was just a silent peripheral violation. He tried to rationalize it. He was tired that the long hours at his job were taking a toll. He was a worried father, and his mind was manufacturing threats where there were none. He tried to ignore it, but the part of his brain responsible for detecting movement, the primal part, wouldn't let him. Every flicker of shadow in the hallway sent a jolt of adrenaline through him. He asked Lily if she was getting up at night. Her eyes were wide and innocent. No. Daddy, I sleep with Mr. Snuggles all night. He asked her if she ever saw anything strange in her room. She just shook her head. He didn't want to frighten her, so he dropped the subject. Determined to prove his own sanity, he set up a small camera on the bookshelf in his study, pointed directly at Lily's open doorway across the hall. He wanted to catch it, to see it clearly, to expose it as a trick of the light. He sat at his desk, pretending to work, his eyes fixed on his laptop screen, but his entire awareness was focused on the hallway. After an hour of tense silence, he saw it, the quick dark blur darting out of her room and vanishing. He didn't turn. He waited, his heart pounding, then calmly reached over and stopped the recording. He played the video back, his hands clammy. He watched the footage of the empty, silent hallway. He watched himself sitting at his desk, pretending to type. He watched the exact moment he had seen the movement, but on the screen, there was nothing. The hallway remained perfectly still, perfectly empty. The logical explanation that he was imagining it was now the most terrifying one. Was he losing his mind? Was the stress of work and fatherhood finally causing him to break? The fear was no longer about what was in the hallway. It was about what was in his own head. He tried to put it behind him, but the sightings continued, a nightly torment at the edge of his vision. The small, dark shape became a part of his routine, a silent, fleeting ghost that he alone could see. He began to feel like he was living in two separate realities: the clear, solid world in front of him and the terrifying, shadowy world in his periphery. One night, the glitch in his reality escalated. He was in his study, as usual. Lily had been asleep for hours. He saw the familiar flicker of movement from her room. But this time, it wasn't just one dot, it was two. Two small, dark shapes, darting out of her room one after the other, moving with a silent, impossible speed. That was it. He couldn't ignore it anymore. This wasn't a trick of his own eyes. Something was happening in his daughter's room. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor, and strode into the hallway. It was empty. He walked to Lily's room and pushed the door, fully open. The room was bathed in the soft glow of her unicorn nightlight. Lily was asleep, just as she always was. But something was different. The air in the room was cold, freezing cold, and it was heavy, oppressive. It felt wrong. He walked over to her bed and knelt beside her. She was breathing peacefully. He gently brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. As he knelt there, he saw it directly not in his periphery. For the first time, he saw it with his full attention. Underneath Lily's bed, in the deep shadows, something moved. It was a small, dark shape, and it was huddled against the far wall. It looked like a child, curled into a ball. But it wasn't a child. Its limbs were too long, too thin. Its shape was wrong, that it was a creature of bent angles in silent darkness. As he watched, it slowly unfurled, its movements jerky and unnatural. Like a spider unfolding its legs. It had no face that he could see, just a smooth, dark surface where a face should be. He was paralyzed with a fear so absolute it stole the air from his lungs. This thing had been in his daughter's room. Every night, hiding under her bed. As he stared, the creature slowly raised one of its long, thin arms and pointed. Not at him. It was pointing at the wall behind him, near the door. He didn't want to turn around. He wanted to grab his daughter and run. but the creature's gesture was a command. He slowly, reluctantly, turned his head, and he saw them. There were more. 3 more of the small, dark creatures were standing by the door, their featureless faces turned towards him. They had been in the room with him the whole time, watching him from the corner of his eye, just beyond the edge of his notice. The ones he had seen darting into the hall hadn't been leaving. They had been trying to lure him out of his study and into the room, into the trap. The creature under the bed began to crawl out, its movements silent and fluid. The others by the door began to glide towards him, their feet making no sound on the floor. They were closing in. A scream finally broke from his throat. He lunged for Lily, scooping her sleeping form from the bed. He spun around, clutching her to his chest, and charged towards the door. The dark shapes scattered like smoke, their forms seeming to melt back into the shadows as he passed. He ran down the stairs, not stopping until he was outside on the cold, wet grass of his front lawn, the security lights blazing. He stood there, gasping for air, clutching his now waking, confused daughter. He never let her sleep in that room again. They sold the house 6 months later. He never told his wife the full story, only that he felt the house was unsafe. He never saw the darting shapes again. But the experience left him permanently changed. He no longer trusts the world his eyes present to him. He is always aware of the periphery, of the corners of his vision. He knows that just because you can't see something clearly doesn't mean it isn't there. Sometimes the most terrifying monsters are the ones that live in the shadows of our own perception, patiently waiting for us to finally turn and look.
Quiet now.
Our next story comes from a university student named Ben, a young man who found solace in the quiet solitude of his campus library. It was an old, Gothic building, a labyrinth of endless corridors and towering shelves that smelled of aging paper and leather. Ben would spend his afternoons in the deep stacks of the history section on the 4th floor, a place most students avoided. It was quiet, secluded, and perfect for studying. He loved the feeling of being surrounded by history, by the silent, sleeping stories bound in leather and ink. He never truly felt alone there. He just didn't realize how right he was. He first noticed it during a long study session for his medieval history final. He was poring over a dense text, the only sound the soft scratch of his pen on his notepad. He had a distinct prickling sensation on the back of his neck, the kind you get when you feel you're being watched. He glanced up from his book, looking down the long, narrow aisle between the shelves. The aisle was empty, bathed in the dim, warm light of the overhead lamps. He dismissed it as paranoia, a side effect of too much caffeine and too little sleep. He went back to his reading, but the feeling persisted. It was a tangible pressure in the air. He tried to ignore it, but his focus was broken. Then, in his far left peripheral vision, he saw it. A flicker of movement in the next aisle over. A brief flash of something dark passing through a gap between the books. He stood up silently and peered through the small gap between 2 heavy tomes. The next aisle was empty. He told himself it was just another student, someone who had been browse and had now moved on. But he hadn't heard any footsteps. In the echoing silence of the deep stacks, every footstep, every cough was an event. This had been silent. Over the following weeks, the phenomenon became more persistent. Every time he studied in the stacks, he would get the same feeling of being watched, followed by a fleeting glimpse of movement in the adjacent aisles. It was never direct. It was always a dark shape, a quick flicker, a shadow that shouldn't be there, seen only from the corner of his eye. He started to feel like he was being stalked by a ghost that understood the geometry of the library better than he did. It always knew which aisle he was in and would position itself in the next one over. It knew how to stay just out of his direct line of sight. He tried changing his study spot, moving to different floors, different sections, but the feeling and the fleeting movements followed him. He saw a dog-shaped dart behind a pillar in the bright, open periodical room. He saw a flicker of movement in the reflection of the microfilm reader's screen, that it wasn't tied to the history stacks, that it was tied to him. One afternoon, he decided to set a trap. He chose a spot in the philosophy section, an area even more deserted than usual. He sat at a carrel at the end of an aisle, but instead of facing his books, he faced the aisle itself, giving him a clear view all the way to the end. He took out his phone, propped it up on a book, and started recording the aisle behind him, using the screen as a makeshift mirror. He sat there for over an hour, his eyes scanning the empty aisle in front of him, while he kept the phone screen in his lower peripheral vision. The library was silent. The air was still. He was beginning to think his presence had scared it off. Then, he saw it on the phone screen. In the reflection of the aisle behind him, a figure was slowly emerging from behind one of the shelves. It wasn't a shadow or a blur. It was a person, a man. He was tall and wore a dark, old-fashioned suit. His face was pale, his features indistinct. In the dim light, he just stood there at the far end of the aisle behind Ben and watched him. Ben's blood ran cold. He didn't dare turn around. He was too afraid of what he would see or what he wouldn't see. He just watched the figure on his phone screen. The man didn't move. He just stood, a silent, patient observer. It was as if he had been there all along, and Ben had only just now found the right way to look. Ben watched, paralyzed, for what felt like an eternity. Then, the man in the reflection slowly, deliberately, raised one hand and brought a single finger to where his lips should be, in a universal gesture for hush. At that moment, the battery on Ben's phone died, the screen going black, severing his only view of the thing behind him. The silence that followed was absolute. He was blind. He didn't know if the man was still there, if he was moving closer. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but his body was frozen in place. He sat there, staring into the empty aisle in front of him, hyper-aware of the vast, silent space at his back. After a minute that stretched for a lifetime, he heard a sound from behind him. It was not the sound of footsteps. It was the soft, dry rustle of a page being turned. That was what broke his paralysis. He leaped from his chair, a strangled cry escaping his lips, and ran. He didn't look back. He fled the deep stacks, the library, bursting out into the bright, jarring sunlight of the late afternoon. He never went back to the fourth floor. He finished his semester studying in crowded coffee shops and noisy student lounges. He passed his medieval history final. He tried to forget, but he couldn't shake the feeling. The man in the suit hadn't been a ghost in the traditional sense. He wasn't haunting the library. He was haunting the act of being unobserved. He was a creature of the periphery, a thing that lived in the quiet, unexamined spaces around us. A few weeks later, Ben was walking through a crowded city plaza. He was feeling better, more like himself. The noise and chaos of the crowd was a comfort. He stopped to look at a street performer. As he watched, he caught a flicker of movement in a shop window's reflection to his left. He turned his head. Nothing, just a bustling crowd. He smiled to himself. Old habits die hard. He turned back to the performer, and then he felt it. A cold spot in the middle of the warm, crowded plaza. The distinct, prickling sensation of being watched. He didn't look. He didn't dare. But he knew, with a chilling certainty, that somewhere, in that anonymous crowd, just at the edge of his vision, a man in a dark suit was standing perfectly still, watching him, his finger pressed to his lips in a silent, eternal command.
I see you.
Our next story is about the paradox of the city. The profound loneliness one can feel while surrounded by millions of people. It comes from a man named Daniel, a subway commuter in a sprawling metropolis, who learned that sometimes the most terrifying thing isn't an empty room, but a crowded one. Because you never know what's looking back at you from inside the anonymous sea of faces. Daniel's daily commute was a study in practiced anonymity. He would descend into the city's roaring, subterranean arteries, find a spot in a crowded subway car, and disappear. He'd put in his headphones, stare at the floor, and count the stops until his own dot. It was a non-space, a river of strangers flowing from one point to another. He found a strange comfort in being invisible, a single, unimportant face in a constantly shifting crowd. The first time he saw it, it was a Tuesday morning during the peak of rush hour. The subway car was packed tight, a compressed mass of humanity. Daniel was holding onto a pole, his gaze unfocused, when he saw it in his periphery. A face. It was just a pale, oval shape in the sea of other faces, but it stood out because it was unnervingly smooth, like a mannequin's head. He blinked, and his eyes refocused. He scanned the crowd, but all he saw were the normal, tired, commuting faces of his fellow passengers. He dismissed it instantly, a trick of the light, his brain creating patterns from the overwhelming visual noise of the crowd. But the next day, he saw it again. Same time, same crowded car. A pale, featureless face, floating in the crowd at the edge of his vision for just a second before vanishing. When he tried to look at it directly, it was always in a different spot. Sometimes near the door, sometimes reflected in the dark window, sometimes seemingly hovering just above the heads of other riders. A cold, specific kind of paranoia began to take root. This was different from the fear of an empty, haunted house. This was a fear that invaded his public space, turning the anonymous crowd from a comfort into a potential threat. Every commute became a tense, hyper-vigilant ordeal. He would scan the faces in the car, searching, but he never saw it when he was looking for it. It only ever appeared when he wasn't. A predator that hunted in the blind spots of his attention. He started to change his routine. He took a later train. He stood in a different car. He tried closing his eyes for the entire journey. But the moment he opened them, he would catch a fleeting peripheral glimpse of the pale, blank face watching him from the crowd. He knew he wasn't hallucinating. This felt external, intentional. It felt like he had been singled out, marked by an entity that could wear the camouflage of a crowd perfectly. The city, his home, no longer felt safe. It felt like a fishbowl, and something was looking in. The climax of this silent, one-sided relationship came a month after the first sighting. He was on the late train home, the car less crowded than usual. He sat in a seat by the window, watching the dark tunnel walls streak past. He was exhausted, his nerves frayed from weeks of constant, low-grade terror. He let his guard down for a moment, resting his head against the cool glass. He saw his own reflection, and the reflections of the few other passengers in the car. And then he saw it. In the reflection, standing in the aisle directly behind his seat, was the face. But it wasn't just a face this time. It had a form. It was attached to a tall, thin figure, dressed in a dark, impeccably tailored suit. And the face wasn't completely blank. As he stared at its reflection, two dark, hollow pits began to form where the eye should be. He didn't move. He just watched in the reflection, his body frozen in a state of pure, primal fear. The figure in the reflection raised a long, pale, featureless hand and placed it on the shoulder of his reflection. He felt nothing, but he saw it. He saw the impossible touch. The figure leaned forward, its blank face moving next to his reflected ear, as if to whisper a secret. The train plunged into a section of even deeper darkness between stations, and the reflection vanished. When the lights of the next station flooded the car, he looked at the window again. The reflection was normal. The aisle behind him was empty. He stumbled off the train at his stop, his legs feeling like they were made of lead. He ran up the stairs and out into the street, gasping for the night air. He thought that maybe, by leaving the train, he had left it behind. He was wrong. As he was walking the few blocks to his apartment, he saw it again. This time, it wasn't a reflection or a peripheral glimpse dot. It was standing on the other side of the street. Under a flickering STREETLIGHT dot, the tall, thin figure in the dark suit dot, it was looking right at him dot, and its face, for the first time, was not blank dot, it was his own. A perfect, identical copy of his own face, but with a cold, dead expression and the two dark, hollow pits for eyes. The doppelganger raised its hand, the same one from the train, and pointed. Not at him dot, it was pointing at a dark alleyway beside him. From the mouth of the alley, another figure emerged, and another, and another. A small crowd of them, all tall, all thin, all wearing dark suits. And as they stepped into the streetlight's glow, he saw their faces. They were all him, a dozen copies of himself, all with the same dead, hollow eyes, all moving towards him in a silent, coordinated phalanx. He didn't scream. He just stood there, his mind finally shattering under the weight of the impossible truth. He hadn't been seeing a face in the crowd. He had been seeing his own. He was a glitch, an anomaly, and the system had sent a crowd of itself to delete him. The city wasn't a fishbowl dot, it was an immune system, and he was the virus. The last thing he saw was a sea of his own dead-eyed faces, closing in, their purpose clear, their movements perfectly synchronized, ready to restore the city to its normal, anonymous order.
Are we there yet?
Our final story is about the loneliness of the long-haul trucker. A life lived in the twilight world of empty highways and endless stretches of asphalt dot. It comes from a man named Ray, a veteran driver who had spent 30 years of his life with his hands on a steering wheel. He was used to the solitude. He found a rhythm in it, a peace. But on a moonless night, somewhere in the vast, empty desert of Nevada, he learned that his cab was not as empty as he thought. Ray was on a cross-country run, hauling a load of machine parts from Utah to California. It was the dead of night, that deep, velvet black part of the world between 2 and 4 a.m. The highway was a straight, dark ribbon cutting through an ocean of sagebrush and shadow. His only companions were the drone of his diesel engine, the crackle of the CB radio, and the hypnotic repetition of the white lines on the road. He was tired, his eyes gritty from staring into the darkness. He took a long drink from his thermos of coffee and glanced around the familiar, worn interior of his cab. The dashboard glowed with a soft green light. His warm baseball cap sat on the passenger seat next to him. Everything was as it should be. He turned his attention back to the road, and in that brief, saccadic movement of his eyes, he saw a dot in his far-right peripheral vision. He caught the distinct impression of a human shape sitting in the passenger seat. He didn't jerk his head. 30 years on the road teaches you not to make sudden moves. He kept his eyes fixed on the highway ahead, but his entire being was focused on the space beside him. He told himself what every driver tells themselves. It's a highway ghost, a trick of the light and the long hours. It was a known phenomenon, a common hallucination for sleep-deprived drivers. He took another sip of coffee, the logical part of his brain trying to reassert control. But the feeling persisted. It wasn't just a visual flicker. It was a presence. He could feel a subtle weight, a dip in the passenger seat cushion. He could feel a cold spot in the warm air of the cab. He decided to test it. He reached over, his movement slow and casual, as if to grab his baseball cap, and let his hand brush against the empty space, where the figure's knee would be. His hand met nothing but the worn fabric of the seat, but as he touched it, the peripheral image of the Figure vanished. A cold wave of relief washed over him. It was a hallucination. The physical act of checking, of confirming the emptiness, had broken the illusion. He chuckled to himself, a dry, tired sound. He muttered, "Getting old." Ray. He drove on. The silence. In the cab, feeling normal again. For about an hour, everything was routine. Then, he saw it again. The same shape, the same impression of a person sitting silently beside him, staring out at the dark desert. This time, he didn't try to touch it. He just kept driving, his heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm. He tried to study it without looking directly at it. It was motionless. A statue made of shadow and suggestion. It had no features, no details. It was just a man-shaped void. The miles rolled by. The presence in his passenger seat remained, a silent, unnerving companion. Ray found himself in a strange state of heightened awareness. He was no longer tired. His senses were sharp. Every sound of the truck, every shift. In the wind, amplified. He felt like he was transporting a secret passenger, a ghost he had picked up somewhere on the long, lonely highway. He decided on another test, a different kind of confirmation. The CB radio crackled to life. Another trucker, a voice he recognized as Grizzly from the chatter earlier in the night. "Breaker 19, you got a copy out there. Eastbound?" Ray picked up his microphone, his eyes still locked on the road ahead. "You got the Night Owl here, Grizzly. I hear you loud and clear." Grizzly's voice came back. "Just checking in, Night Owl. This stretch gets lonely. How's the passenger holding up?" Ray's blood ran cold. He gripped the microphone, his knuckles white. His voice was tight. The passenger?" There was a pause. On the radio, then Grizzly's voice came back, confused. "Yeah, the fella in your seat. Saw him clear as day when I passed you a few miles back. Figured you had a co-driver. Looked like he was sleeping." The microphone slipped from Ray's hand, clattering to the floor. It wasn't in his head. It wasn't a hallucination. Grizzly had seen it too. It was real. A solid, visible presence that only appeared when you weren't looking directly at it. A new, terrifying thought entered his mind. If it was real, what did it want? Why was it here? Was it a benign spirit, a lonely traveler? Or was it something else? He knew he had to see it. He had to look. He couldn't drive another 1,000 miles with this thing sitting next to him. He took a deep, steadying breath. He whispered to the empty space beside him. "Okay, I see you." He turned his head. The passenger seat was empty. His worn baseball cap sat on the cushion, exactly where he had left it. There was no one there. But the feeling of the presence hadn't vanished. It had just moved. He could feel it now, not beside him, but behind him, a cold spot on the back of his neck. The prickling sensation of being watched from directly over his shoulder. It had been in front of him, in his periphery, as long as he refused to look. But the moment he acknowledged it, the moment he turned to confront it, it had shifted its position, out of his sight line, maintaining its advantage. He was trapped. He couldn't pull over. He was in the middle of the desert. He couldn't look behind him while driving. All he could do was stare at the empty road ahead, hyper-aware of the thing breathing silently down his neck. He began to watch his mirrors. The wide side mirrors showed him nothing but the dark, empty highway stretching out behind his trailer. But the small convex mirror mounted on the dash, the one that gave a wide, distorted view of the cab's interior. He could see it. In the warped fisheye reflection, he could see the back of his own headrest, and peeking over the top of it was a sliver of darkness, a pale, distorted shape. The face of his passenger. It was watching him in the mirror. He drove for what felt like a lifetime, his eyes darting between the road ahead and the terrifying reflection in the small, convex mirror. He was a prisoner in his own cab. As the first faint light of dawn began to paint the eastern sky, he felt a change in the air. The cold spot on his neck began to fade. the feeling of being watched. Lesson. He risked a glance at the small mirror. The shape was gone. He pulled over at the next truck stop, his body trembling with exhaustion and relief. He stumbled out of the cab and into the bright, jarring lights of the diner, leaving the truck's engine running. He drank 3 cups of black coffee, his hands shaking so hard he could barely hold the mug. When he finally felt calm enough, he walked back to his truck in the full light of the morning sun. He opened the passenger door, half expecting to find anything left behind. The seat was empty, but when he looked at the floor mat, he saw it. It was a single, long black feather, the kind that comes from a crow or a raven, but it was impossibly large, nearly 2 feet long, and it hadn't been there before. He picked it up. It was cold to the touch, and it seemed to absorb the light, radiating a strange, silent darkness. He knew then what his passenger had been. He had picked up a hitchhiker from a place that wasn't on any map, a silent observer, a creature of shadow and periphery. He never drove that stretch of highway at night again, but sometimes, on other long, lonely roads, when he's tired and the hour is late, he'll feel it. A subtle dip in the passenger seat cushion, a cold spot in the warm air of the cab, and he'll catch a fleeting glimpse of a dark shape in his periphery. He never turns to look. He never acknowledges it. He just keeps his eyes on the road and drives, knowing he is sharing his cab with a ghost that only he and the occasional passing trucker can see. A man in an office. A shadow on the ceiling. A figure in a crowded subway. A presence in a silent library. These stories all share a terrifying, fundamental truth. Our eyes are not to be trusted. We spend our lives looking forward, focused on what's in front of us, believing that our perception is our reality. But the most dangerous predators are the ones that hunt in the blind spots. They are the entities of the periphery, the ghosts, that live in the corner of your eye. They exist in that fleeting, uncertain space between a glance and a stare. What are they? Where do they come from? Are they products of our tired minds, or are they visitors from a place that operates on different rules of perception? The truth is, we don't know. All we know is that feeling, that cold, prickling certainty that you are not alone, even when a room is empty. So, the next time you see a flicker of movement, a dark shape that vanishes when you turn, do you dare to look again? Or are you more afraid of what you'll find if you don't? If you've ever felt that chilling presence at the edge of your sight, prove you're still watching by subscribing to Whispered Fear, leaving a like, and sharing this video. Your engagement helps us shine a light on the shadows. But what happens when the thing in the shadows finally steps into the light, and you wish with all your soul that it had stayed hidden? Click the video on your screen now for our next collection. 5. True Encounters with a Figure Who Had No Face. See you there, if you can bear to look at what's looking back.